その少女の存在は密かに隠されていた。
I first watched Violet Evergarden out of boredom in late 2020. I'd seen the trailers for it on Netflix and such, but factors, which should be obvious, left me with even more free time than usual, enough to start working through my backlog. At first I thought it was good. Beautifully animated, but narratively just alright, with nothing super groundbreaking, but a solid premise all the same. But as the show went on, as my life went on, I found the story of Violet searching for meaning in a loved one's final words to be quite similar to my own search for meaning in my life. What I wanted to do now that I was a junior in high school. By the time I had finished the main show, I was completely hooked. Just for a quick summary, the story follows a child soldier given the name Violet who was used as a weapon by her country. During the concluding battle of the war, Violet loses both her arms, and her commanding officer, the only parental figure in her life, is deemed missing in action. Afterwards, that officer's friend, a man by the name of Hodgins, makes good on a promise the two made, taking Violet under his care. It's under him, through his company and with new mechanical arms, that she soon finds work as an auto-memory doll, someone who writes letters for others, with the unique challenge of writing not what their clientele say, but what they mean. For a seemingly emotionless girl like Violet, this proves a challenge, yet she sticks with it anyway, becoming more emotional by proxy of her clients, all for one purpose: to decode the final words her commanding officer, Gilbert, ever gave her.
愛してるを知りたいのです。
And find out she does, experiencing firsthand what love means to all kinds of people. Brothers and sisters, parents and children, between friends, and between lovers. But she's also exposed to more complicated versions of love, or more so, more complicated expressions of love. Primarily, the love found in mourning, in grief. All this serves to teach Violet what it is to love, and broadens her ideas of what those final words really meant. And it's here where I think the story is at its best. When Violet is not just working for her client, but connecting with them, becoming both an outlet for their emotions and a scholar to the lessons they learn from those emotions, learning to deal and feel alongside them. If you want a more explicit example, two such episodes, Episode 7 and Episode 10, The Playwright and the Ill Mother, illustrate this best, both telling their stories so excellently that upon rewatch, I cried to both. Going into the movie, I didn't really know what to expect. I had thought that the main story was over with the conclusion of the show. Bittersweet, as emotions tend to be, but content, with Violet reaching her goal of figuring out what Gilbert's I love you meant, at least to her. Yet, seeing that a spin-off episode and an entire movie-length special were released after the show's conclusion, I caught on to what the show was setting up, which, upon seeing the poster for the movie, all but confirmed my suspicion. That Gilbert, despite everything, was alive. Fundamentally speaking, I have objections to this. For starters, this is in the same narrative where at least 4 separate episodic stories focus on grief, 2 of which involve soldiers never coming home. Grief is more prevalent than any other kind of love depicted, so it just feels a tad misleading, maybe, to then go, oh, he was actually alive all along. But also, Violet's grief over his believed death is the basis from which all her emotional growth stems. It's because she can't ask what he meant when he said I love you that she goes on the emotional journey that is the rest of the story. So theoretically, his being alive could ruin all that growth, if not make it for nothing. But let's give it a chance, why not? It could still salvage things, or maybe it'll prove me wrong. He's probably also a changed person, right? The story does take place 4 years after the show, so a lot can happen in that time. Sure did for me. So, what did I think of the movie? Well, read the title of the video. Then read the first line in the description. Yeah, that's not bait. That's genuinely how I feel. I cannot bring myself to like this movie, but I also can't find it in myself to say I dislike it, let alone hate it. For starters, I actually do enjoy the changes made to Gilbert. Gilbert in the show was often treated more as an emotional object than a character, so to see his characterization come to life beyond Violet's flashbacks was interesting enough. In doing so, however, the movie makes it very clear that he's not exactly the same man he was when Violet last saw him. And not just because he's missing an eye and an arm of his own, but because he's been stewing in his regrets for so long that, for all the growth she's made emotionally, he's kind of regressed. Grown distant as a result. Distant enough that, for the briefest of moments, I thought the movie was going to forgo a happy ending almost entirely, with his declining to see her completely driving her away. But, in the end, that's not what happened. Though he did seclude himself away from Violet, even when she was literally begging through his front door. After a failed attempt by Violet to simply come to terms with the situation and move on, Gilbert's brother, Dietfried, the one who gave Violet to him in the first place, tells Gilbert of all the happenings in their family. How the family has begun to move on from Gilbert's supposed death, and how Violet continues to honor his life, including visiting their mother's grave. This, along with a well-timed letter by Violet, thanking Gilbert for everything he did for her, causes him to chase after Violet. In the end, they reunite, closing out the movie with some epilogue scenes, and roll credits. With what we have of this story in analysis, I can't help but feel dissatisfied over it. Or, more specifically, what it's trying to do versus thematically what it could have been doing. Because what I think really damages the story of this movie is its commitment to being a romance of sorts about Violet and Gilbert. As I said earlier, Gilbert being gone and Violet being unable to simply ask him what he meant is the reason for all her emotional development. Without Gilbert in her life, while she would grieve him as natural given the circumstances, she has undeniably grown to be a more emotional, one might say, happier person. Even Gilbert has taken note of this. In the closest thing they have to an argument, when Violet is outside his door, he talks about how even with his voiced opposition, he still used her as the child soldier she was, and that this made her unhappy regardless of whether she realized that or not. Without Gilbert in her life, Violet has indeed become happier, both because she is happier and also because she's grown to be able to recognize when she feels such emotions. And that's why he doesn't want to see Violet, because he knows his presence represents everything that she was. The child soldier, slaughtering men with unmatched efficiency. The emotionless doll, terrified that she'll be thrown away the moment she stops being useful. The one whose only ever selfish wish was a brooch the color of his eyes. Back then, Gilbert was seemingly the only person who really cared for her, treated her as a person, even giving her a name, but now? He's one of the only people left who used her as a weapon. Relative to many of her friends, Gilbert's treatment was downright abusive, and the fact that he could have just not used her but did anyway weighs heavy on his conscience. Something that stings almost just as much is the fact that the potential for an equally interesting story was right there, present throughout the entire series, including the movie, arguably more so than even Gilbert. That being Hodgins. See, Hodgins himself is an interesting sort. Pretty much as soon as the war was over, he retired from the military and started his own postal company. As a person, he's shown to be incredibly caring, if a tad blunt, when it counts, maintaining positive personal relationships with pretty much all of his employees, or at least the ones we can see. However, he can be something of a worrywart, shown to often fret over Violet, sometimes like a concerned friend, others like a doting father. Actually, that last bit pretty much describes all his interactions with Violet. He acts not like a replacement for Gilbert, but instead as the father she never had. And that's a bit more literal than you'd think, because on top of the letter he writes at the end being addressed to Daddy's future daughter, there are small references near the end of the show going into the movie that show a general desire for fatherhood, often interlinked with moments where he thinks about Violet. In a sense, I think he really does see Violet as his daughter. And it is that note that I think the movie should have run with. It feels almost pigeonholed into being a romance, when in reality I think it would have served much better as a mystery. The story of two people, a caretaker and a caretakee, a father and a daughter, searching for answers together, not getting the ones they wanted, but growing closer from the journey. What if it wasn't exactly clear if Gilbert was alive or not? What if they got hints that perhaps he was still kicking, and the rest of the movie was them on a journey to find their own answers? If not just to get some closure, you know? Perhaps they could talk one-on-one about what Gilbert meant to them. Hodgins almost never talks about Gilbert outside of his death, so there could be some elaborations on their friendship. Heck, he could even directly ask Violet if she was happy with Gilbert, mirroring the flashback where Gilbert asks the same. What am I doing? What am I doing? What right do I have to say any of this? At some point, that stopped being an analysis and just became, well, fanfiction. I don't know how things went in the light novels. Maybe they were better elaborated on. Maybe Gilbert being alive was better foreshadowed, or maybe I'm just coping with not liking the ending to something I thoroughly enjoyed. I don't know. And it's that unsureness that's become a point of conflict for me. I dislike what it is, finding the potential of a different story much more appealing, but is that not disrespectful to the story that the movie is trying to tell? What does the line for analysis end? On that, I may never know. There is one more reason I can't bring myself to dislike this movie. One that, if you keep up with news in the anime sphere, you know all too well, as recent updates on it are actually what inspired me to make this video. See, Violet Evergarden is a show made by Kyoto Animations, a premier studio with many beloved shows under its belt. On the 18th of July 2019, its Studio One building was victim to an arson attack, which would become one of the deadliest in Japan since World War II. Recently, the perpetrator of that attack was given the death penalty. At the time of the fire, 2 Violet Evergarden projects had been announced, with one being completed the day before the fire, and the other, being the movie, seeming to be the first thing Kyoto finished following the fire. Every time I think of how this movie's story played out, I can't help but imagine what it felt like to work on this. Endings to me always have this bittersweetness to them, but after such a tragedy, would I too not want the ending to be as happy as possible? Would something such as that attack not be big enough to shift the writer's perspectives? I think about this and I'm paralyzed, because I know that it's what I would do. So who am I to criticize them for that? A part of me hesitates to make this video at all. Kyoto Animations also made A Silent Voice, the only film to ever make me cry, and one that continues to do so as I anticipate it's a story I will be returning to for many years to come. Kyoto holds a very special place in my heart, and it always will, but I believe that such an attachment shouldn't matter when it comes to analysis. The quality of a story, a piece of art, of media completely on its own, absent any outside context, is a factor that I try my absolute hardest to consider, sometimes above all else, and as the final chapter in the story of Violet Evergarden, this movie simply fails, at least to me. But then, when I find myself about to criticize the film, I think of the legacy, and how the arson will forever be tied to it. I don't like this movie. I doubt I ever will, but when I think of the show, the themes and messages as a whole, and the tragedy that surrounds it all, I just can't bring myself to hate it.